Hello, I'm Amy the Amazonian, and today I'm going to be talking about a paper commander deck. That's right, talking about Anikthea, one of the pre-con commanders from Commander Masters. I'm going to be talking about both the pre-con, the one that you can buy directly, or the one that is mine. That's right, I brewed my own Anikthea deck. You'll actually be able to see it pretty soon because I played it on an upcoming episode of Command Zone's Extra Turns. They told me that I could pick any commander that was in Commander Masters for it, and I picked this one because I think Anikthea and, in general, enchantments are really cool. As a disclaimer, this is a sponsored video. It is made as part of the MTG Ambassador Program. They sent me this. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for giving me a copy of this deck, and a bunch of other really cool swag. Also, if you are interested in picking up Commander Masters products for yourself, check out your local game store or the link in the description of the video. So without further ado, let's talk about Anikthea. So as you can see on this webpage right here, there are 4 different new pre-constructed decks that were made as part of Commander Masters. You have Zuladok, Anikthea, Commodore Guff, and Sliver Gravemother in that kind of theming there. You have big colorless Eldrazi, you have Abzan enchantments, you have Jeskai planeswalkers, and you have 5 color slivers. And of those 4, Anikthea really speaks to me. I'm somebody who, as many of you know, loves green and white and loves enchantment decks. And I've also tried to build before a variety of different enchantment decks, and oftentimes found that yes, green and white, like Sithis, is a fantastic way to start building your deck. But black has so many cool enchantments in it. One of my personal favorites is Binding the Old Gods. It's removal, it's ramp, it's death touch, and it's recurable using many other cards like Anikthea. So I'm going to scroll down to the Anikthea precon here, going past some of these other neat things, so you can see what Anikthea does. Anikthea is an enchantment herself. She's a 4/4 with Menace that gives other enchantment creatures you control Menace. And when she enters the battlefield or attacks, you can exile a non-aura enchantment from your graveyard and make a 3/3 zombie token copy of it, which means you want to put enchantments in your graveyard and then bring them back as creatures, because they don't have to have been creatures to start. You can bring them back as creatures. There's also some other new cards in this deck, original to this deck and Commander Masters in general, like Narcy, Fable Singer, and a few other cards that are in the list itself. So this deck is really what I already was doing with my deck list. It has various things that whenever you cast an enchantment or have an enchantment enter the battlefield, you draw a card. That's what you want to do with Enchantress decks. You want to get value because value is fun. And then you want to play just interesting things that happen to already be enchantments, like Sandworm Convergence. If you want to put things into your graveyard, Mending of Dominaria. There's a few other pieces in here too. Oh, look, they even put Binding the Old Gods in this deck because they know how much fun it is. Oh gosh, I was thinking of Binding the Titans, which mills both players when it enters the battlefield, or I guess I should say for its first chapter. There's a lot of cool things with enchantments that also work with the graveyard. I am trying to figure out if in their precon they did the same thing as me and played what I'm going to call a very niche and unusual card, Mindrak Harpy. Yeah, they did! Mindrak Harpy is a 3/2 flyer for 4 mana. Maybe not that good, but it does mill both players, and it is an enchantment, which means it's perfect for Anikthea. So this is a precon deck. I don't want to talk about it too much because mine's cooler. This is Nyxed from the Grave, my Abzan enchantment resurrection deck. I brewed this before this deck was officially released, so I got to have a great time picking up my favorite cards from the precon and putting them into my list. So I'm going to talk about what I'm doing with each of these cards. So Anikthea, she's the commander, she's awesome, her colors are great, and she loves enchantments. So this deck is full of enchantments. Calyx. There's only really one planeswalker that cares about enchantments, and it's Calyx. Calyx Destiny Hands, and we also have Calyx in his creature form, Guided by Fate. Just like Anikthea, Calyx makes copies of enchantments. And Calyx can actually copy the things that Anikthea makes into tokens. Because they're still enchantments, it lets you make copies. You're going to notice that as a lot of the enchantments over here help me make more enchantments. There's a mix of things. We have Anointed Procession. It doubles the tokens. So if I'm bringing things back, bam, more tokens. That's great. Binding the Old Gods, my favorite piece of removal. I told you I love this. Except it's not my favorite because we just got a new card from the precon called Cacophony Unleashed. That's it in the corner right there. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, destroy all non-enchantment creatures. This is like 1 mana more than a sorcery that did the same thing, but it's an enchantment itself. Okay, I love that. I don't know if anybody else cares. I do. It also, when it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, it can become a 6/6 nightmare with Meneth and Death Touch until end of turn. That's great. Listen, I love a board wipe that turns into a creature as much as the next person, but I love a board wipe that's also an enchantment because it's great for my deck. Speaking of that, I actually took out an enchantment that's also a board wipe from one of my builds of this deck because I found that Meat Hook Massacre was just not that fun. I did my best to try to make this into a fun deck. Also, if you're noticing my camera is flickering, yes, I know it is, and I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with my camera right now. Things are kind of weird, and I'm just going to keep recording. Anyway, we have Black Market Connections. It makes tokens. It gets you card draw. It lets me pay life. Paying life is fun. Burgeoning. Fun at any table. Lets everybody play more lands. Except it's really just me playing more lands. Whenever any opponent plays a land, I get to put a land into play. With the amount of card draw in this deck, I should have a hand that's ready to spew out some lands. Cacophony Unleashed! That's what I was just talking about. Elspeth Conquers Death, it's more enchantment-based removal. Why do I like this even though it's 5 mana over, say, just, like a Banishing Light effect? I like this more because it permanently exiles something, and it also reanimates things. I know it takes a couple turns to get rolling, but I like sagas. Enchantress's Presence, more card draw. Ethereal Absolution destroys other people's little tiny tokens and makes mine bigger. Also lets me have some graveyard hate. Flower in a White Tree. It's a great card. It makes all of my creatures stronger. It's also only 2 mana. It's so good. It also helps protect my legends, like my commander. Hallowed Haunting makes more tokens for me, and eventually will give all of my creatures Flying and Vigilance if I have 7 or more enchantments, which I totally will. Candace's Transformation, that's just a bit of hate for other people's commanders, turning them into elks so they can't cause problems. Mari's Wake, because more mana, more fun, more bigger creatures too. Out of the Tombs. Somebody in my chat actually recommended this card to me, and I was like, oh, that is such a funny card. We have to put it in a deck. This is from the Warhammer decks, but Out of the Tombs is an enchantment that mills your graveyard and mills more and more and more every single turn. Eventually it turns into reanimation, but only if your deck is completely empty. It's really just an enchantment that mills me. That's why it's in the deck, because it's funny. Parallel Lives. Just like Anointed Procession, it's making more tokens. Song of the World Soul. Cast a spell, populate. Makes more tokens, because when you populate, you make copies of tokens you already have. Starfield of Nyx. This animates all of my enchantments and also brings them back from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's 2 things I want to be doing because I'm doing graveyard. Stop it, camera. I see you doing that. Teachings of the Kirin. It puts things in my graveyard, and also it is graveyard hate, and it's an interesting enchantment. Also, any of these flip sagas have 2 enter the battlefield, 1 on the front side, 1 on the back, which is great for all the constellation cards in the deck. Cruelty of Gix. It's just a cool card. You take things out of your opponent's hand, you tutor from your deck, and then you get to reanimate from anybody's graveyard. Creature from anyone's graveyard. It's just cool. Eldest Reborn. Kind of similar to Cruelty of Gix, except it is force a sacrifice, then a discard, and those all say each opponent. Then you get to reanimate. You can also get Planeswalkers with this. This is one of my favorite uncommons ever printed. It's so fun. Looking back over creatures, I kind of skipped over these before. We have ways to protect Anikthea. We just have a good enchantment creature that's a spider. This has Constellation, spits out Pegasi, which are tokens, and we're already like doubling tokens. Just some ramp. Calyx, copies things, makes things bigger. Composer of Spring. This is actually new to Anikthea. Like, this is a card that was part of the Anikthea precon. It's just nice. It gives you lands onto the battlefield, and then creatures onto the battlefield. Very much a good card for a enchantment deck, especially when it's very focused in green-white. Corsair of Kruphix, playing lands off the top of my deck. Destiny Spinner, stopping people from countering my creatures and enchantments. Doomwake Giant, killing other people's creatures. And also, just being a big, chunky enchantment creature. Bride of the Elysian Grove, more lands per turn, gives me free fixing. Eidolon of Blossoms, card draw, Erebos, God of the Dead. I really like the idea of animating a god with Anikthea. It's just really cool to me. It reminds me a bit of Zur and animating creatures with Zur. All the gods being animated with Zur are cool. Gravebreaker Lamia specifically puts a card into my graveyard, which I can bring back with Anikthea. We've got more gods with Heliod, Karametra. I've got some discounts off the Jukai Naturalist. Herald of the Pantheon as well. These both make my enchantments cost less. Llanowar Elves, Mind Rack, Harpy. I talked before about this putting things in my graveyard for me. I love that. Nissan Wanderer. It gets me more lands. I'm green. I like lands. Nylia's Colossus, a big chunky boy who can become absolutely massive. And if you're giving it Trample, which we do have some ways to give it Trample, or just Anikthea giving it Menace, this thing can end the game. Nice. Nylia, gotta hunt. More gods. Gives Trample. That's what I'm talking about. Nyx Weather, it's a spider, and it puts things into the graveyard. Ooh. It can also come back from, or it can also bring things back from my graveyard to my hand, just in case I mill something that I really want now. One of the biggest, most expensive, fancy-pantsy, 7 mana enchantments. Nyx Bloom Ancient. My god, look at it. It triples my mana, so I can cast even more enchantments. Onto Spirit Dancer. This is another new one. When an enchantment enters the battlefield under my control, I can create a token copy of it. More tokens! I love tokens! This guy is not a token, but makes tokens. It gets to go in a deck. Varika, more gods. I really like the idea of, like, a Theros creature, Hand of Erebos. Like, clearly she is part of Erebos' crew. That's the god of the undead. Or the god of the dead, I suppose. I love the idea that Anikthea would hang out with other things. Also, Anikthea does make zombies. If you want to do something with, like, zombie cards, you totally could in this deck. There's just not many things that care about zombies and enchantments outside of, there's a legendary Harpy that made zombies, too. Kind of cool. Sanctum Weaver. This thing rules. This thing can make so much mana, because it's mana equal to the number of enchantments you control, which in this deck is, like, everything. Except for you, Satyr Enchanter, who just draws me lots of cards. Thank you for drawing me cards. Setessan Champion also draws me cards, gets huge. Shigeki fills my graveyard, gets me lands, is an enchantment. Spirited Companion. Okay, when I was looking at, like, cards to cut from this deck, I genuinely was like, I can't cut the dog. She's perfect. She draws me a card. Oh, Sithis. If you're building, like, the Selesnya enchantments, Sithis is really good. She's, like, one of the best Enchantress-related cards, because she herself is an Enchantress, also draws you a card, only costs 2 mana. Fantastic card, and can be your commander. Weaver of Harmony can double various effects of enchantments, and also makes all your enchantments stronger! Everything else, not that interesting in this deck. Like, we got Boots and Greaves to help protect Nylia, help her go fast because she does trigger on attack. Soul Ring for ramp. Bow of Nylia. It's an enchantment and also an artifact. I like how it put it under enchantments, or under artifacts instead of being under enchantments. Signet, same thing, ramp fixing. We have Nature's Lore and Farseek. Commune with the gods. Valaged Recovery is both a land and a sorcery. And also, Resurgent Belief. There's a couple different cards that bring back all enchantments from your graveyard to the battlefield. And a lot of them are really, really strong. So I didn't put them in the deck. It's the same problem as Meathook Massacre. I just felt it was too strong. So instead, I put in Resurgent Belief. It has Suspend. So you play it, and then you have a couple turns until it then brings everything back from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sweet. As for the land base, I just kind of put in my favorite cycles of lands that I knew I had access to. Things like Beside You, these channel lands. I've got Pain lands. I'm trying to remember what they're called. We have Pathways. I have the Battle Bond lands. I have some of the ones that come in untapped early. I also have a specific to this deck, Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Puts enchantments from my graveyard on top of my deck. Oh, here we go. Yeah, the Battle Bond lands, when to care about you having 2 or more opponents. It's just pretty sweet. I can see my camera is still glitching out, though. I still don't know what's going on with that, but I hope you like this little breakdown of my deck. Probably the most interesting card in here is something like Starfield of Nyx, a very, very cool card if you're putting things in your graveyard, and also playing with a lot of enchantments. I can't wait to get to play this deck, and even just right out of the box, it seems pretty nice. I did get to see all of the cards in this before it came out, and I kind of had the opinion of, oh, nice. This has Sithis in it, and I'm already satisfied because I like Sithis. And I was trying to get a copy of one anyway so I could build a Sithis deck. So now I can build both a Sithis deck and an Anikthea deck in paper. And that's great. I love getting to do both. Get you a deck that can do both. That's this one. Let's go Anikthea. Also, let's go Abzan enchantments. Let's go enchantment decks in general. Let's go any deck that has green and white and something else, because those are the best kinds of decks. I hope that you liked this little breakdown of my deck techs, and if you want to see something like this in the future, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to do a slightly more scripted breakdown of a deck. I just kind of wanted to ramble about my favorite cards for a little bit, and that's what I got to do. And it was sponsored content, so thank you, Wizards of the Coast and the MTG Ambassador Program. You're helping me make my memes more than dreams.